The weekly wage packet before we had credit cards, before we had bank overdrafts and other types of lending, and before our wages were paid into our bank account, where for some it just covers your overdraft anyway. Well, yes, we had a weekly wage packet in a brown pay packet or an envelope. So how did we survive without credit? How did we budget before the bank started throwing money at us, offering debt? That's what we're going to talk about today. Life on a weekly wage, paid in cash, no wave and pay, just tapping your card, just careful weekly planning and budgeting, and trying to save. So let us get on with it. How many of you remember queuing up at the cash office every Thursday or Friday, waiting for your wages in that brown pay packet, stuffed with notes and coins, and you took it home in order to work out your weekly budget, emptying your wage packet on the kitchen table, working out your bills and your food and how to keep a roof over your head? Payday was always a day, however, where the staff canteen would be full because you treated yourself to a good breakfast. And why not? You'd work for it. And talking about that brown wage packet, what was written on the front of it was your name, your payroll number, your stamp and your tax deductions, and the amount that you had earned, which was the only number that you were interested in, your take-home pay. Stamp being the old word for national insurance contributions. This comes from a time where people had to purchase a national insurance stamp from the post office. They handed it into their employer every week in order to be able to claim any sick pay or to contribute towards their pensions. This method was phased out many years ago, but today you will still hear the odd person saying stamp and tax. That's of course if you're a certain age. Your wages are always reflected from the previous week, as most people had to work a week in hand when they started their job. So you would write down your hours, what hours you'd worked in your little book, and checked your handwritten payslip to make sure it all added up correctly. Because when your company or your boss paid you manually, without computers, mistakes were often made. But that was never a problem, because the cash office would always make up the difference, so you didn't have to wait too long before you got your full weekly pay all worked out. You'd check your overtime hours too, to make sure that was paid correctly. There was always an excitement if you worked an extra shift for that payday, which was sometimes either time and a half or even double time. And I can remember 2 weeks before Christmas, the Christmas break, they called it Pudding Week. That was where everybody worked as many hours as they could in order to get a good Christmas bonus. And do you remember walking into the accounts department with a wages question and seeing a group of people all working on those old comptometers? I always thought they were amazing, to be honest. So, you're there sitting at the kitchen table, allocating monies for your rent, your gas, your electricity, the milkman, the coalman, and it all had to be paid out of that weekly wage. And food was very carefully worked out, buying cheaper cuts of meat and cooking from scratch in order to save money. That weekly wage packet had to stretch for 7 days, with sometimes very little luxuries, or the ability to put a bit of cash away for those rainy days. So you knew exactly how much you had because the cash was in your house. Very few companies, if any, had a pension scheme back then. It was always amazing how many people managed to make their money last, particularly when cooking meals such as large stews with plenty of potatoes or rice. Now I used to call it YMCA to my mother. Yesterday's mug cooked again. But she was never very pleased at it. It was an era where people bought sensibly. After all, why buy a chicken portion when you could buy the whole chicken for a fraction of the price? Bagged salad and prepared fruit and vegetables, that just goes off quicker than the whole thing. Not to say that it's much more cheaper to buy the whole vegetable that you know is going to last a hell of a lot longer. Now overdrafts, what were they? Many people didn't have bank accounts, so they wouldn't have overdrafts or bank loans. They were out of the question, so there was never any worrying about paying interest. So we didn't have to load up banking apps or check our credit card statements to find how much available balance that we got. We just literally looked at how much cash was in the house. So what did we do when we ran out of money, when times were hard, that unexpected bill or something went wrong in the house? such as a broken washing machine or the radio started to play up. Well, we had two choices. We either went without and saved, or maybe we borrowed a radio off a neighbour that we could use until we had ours mended, not afford a new one. Buying second-hand was never embarrassing. There were plenty of second-hand shops in most working class areas, plenty of repair shops too. So if items did go wrong, you could get them repaired at a much lower cost. I used to love wandering around those second-hand shops, rummaging away to find out what kind of bargains you could get, especially in those boxes that they kept on the floor with those little knick-knacks, what they call bric-a-brac. Fun days. I can remember one day we went into a second-hand shop and we bought an old dance set record player. £1.50 it was, and it came with a pile of records. It was an exciting time. My first record that I ever played on that record player, was Hayley Mills' Let's Get Together. I wonder if you can remember the very first record you played, not bought, played. Now, as far as credit was concerned, our corner shop was probably the only place that we'd go for a little bit of tick. Tick meaning a little bit of credit that you could pay for a few groceries on your next payday. They wrote it down in a little book, but if you didn't pay up, in some places your name would be put in the window, and you never wanted that. Sometimes we may borrow from friends if times are really hard, but that was life before credit. Now I'm only talking like a little bit of sugar or a few tea bags here, not thousands of pounds. But we had very little without credit, but it always meant that what we had for was paid for without having to worry about large HP bills. Those are the days, if you saw anybody with a credit card, you always thought they were posh. Today, getting a credit card just means that you're relying on it. Well, that's my opinion, but then I was never very careful with credit cards, so I ditched them. Now, during these hard times, there was always a pawnbroker who, back in the 1960s and 70s, or even earlier, would take almost anything, not just jewellery, as most pawnbrokers do today, and only ask for gold. I can remember people taking in radios, televisions, clothes, suits, practically anything, and on payday, back down the pawn shop to buy it all back, just for a few pennies more than what they lent to you. Now, I can remember my father having more pawn tickets in his wallet than notes sometimes, and this was a sign of the times, but you knew that if you got it back within 6 months, you were okay. But after 6 months, you would see it in that pawn shop window for sale, and it was very upsetting. Mind you, if you didn't particularly like the item, you'd just leave it there. Okay, let's have a look at how we typically spent our hard-earned cash back in the day. So what I'm going to do is take a typical journey to work and compare it today from 50 to 60 years ago. Ready? Today, it's a drive to work, stopping at the local coffee shop, paying about £3.50 just for a coffee. Lunchtime, going out for a sandwich, or going into a supermarket for a meal deal, which will cost you about £4. Then driving back, maybe picking up some bits and bobs from expensive petrol station, deciding what's for dinner, where on occasion, or in some situations often, it was a takeaway order to be delivered. Now 50 years ago, a ride on your bike or to catch the bus. No stopping at coffee shops because you had your flask with your tea, together with your packed sandwiches ready to eat for your lunch, or homemade. And on your way back, you'll be thinking of what's going to be on the table or what's going to be cooked for your family dinner that evening. You work out how little money was spent in the past compared to what we spend on a daily basis without even thinking about it. I wonder how many times people tap their bank cards during a working day compared to how we used to live in the past, where the only money you had was kept in your pocket and it would be for your bus fare. I said earlier, many of these companies, particularly factories, would have a staff canteen, but that didn't mean you were eating that canteen every day. It wasn't like a cafe. You were allowed to eat your own sandwiches in the place or sometimes use the vending machines. But today, vending machines are all over the place in canteens. And they're not cheap either. And of course, they now take cards. There are other ways we used to make our weekly wage stretch, for example, putting more blankets on beds to keep warm in cold winters rather than run up the heating. Not that there was central heating facilities back then for many. wearing thicker clothes in the home to keep warm rather than turning up the heat into full blast, and seeing people walking around in their home in shorts. I have never seen any sense in that sort of economy. Now, for those who remember being paid weekly, do you think it made it easier to budget rather than wait for your monthly pay, like people do today? Yes, of course, I know we got direct debits that go out every month, but I can't help but thinking when I was weekly paid, if I was broke just before payday, I would only have to wait a couple of days before my wage packet was in my hand again. Today, if you're out of money, you've got quite a few days to wait. Now, I can remember when our company, like many others during the late 70s and 80s, started to pay your wages into a bank account, albeit it was still weekly. Barclays was the bank account that my company used when they opened a bank account for me, and my wages were paid in every week. I'd say about 3 months after this happening, I got a letter from Barclays asking me if I'd like an overdraft, asking me if I'd like a credit card, and of course I took advantage of it. That could have been the beginning of persistent debt for many people. I wonder how many kids will be happy with that sort of lifestyle today, with the knowledge of having to wait for things or even go without things that your family couldn't afford. But all this was before the age of the never never and the buy now pay later. Everything available on tap, not having to worry about paying it till afterwards. How things have changed. They were great days, and I hope that I've shared some good memories of how we used to live.